Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Visualizing Equitable Energy Transitions with Slope. We have an exciting lineup of presenters today, and this webinar, I should mention, is being hosted by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA. Before I pass it over to our presenters, I'd like to go over a few quick webinar logistics. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode. You've got a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can call via telephone, or you can connect via your computer speakers. If you'd like to minimize your webinar console, you can do that by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also use that arrow to expand the webinar console. One thing that you might like to do with your webinar console is to submit your questions and your comments. We will be saving about 15 minutes or so following our presentations for a Q&A with the audience, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So do put those in when you think of them. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email with a link to the webinar recording and a PDF of the webinar slides within about 48 hours. And we'll also post all of those materials on CESA's website at cesa.org/webinars. So with that, I'd like to now pass it over to my colleague, Ramanan. Abbe is a project manager here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and she is going to get us started.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone so much for joining us today. To give you all a bit of background, the Clean Energy States Alliance is a bipartisan coalition of state energy agencies from around the country, many of which you can see on the screen here. Our focus is on working with our members to advance clean energy technologies and foster an equitable and just clean energy transition that benefits everyone. So we're very happy to be partnering with the National Renewable Energy Lab and one of our members, the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, to bring you this demonstration of how the State and Local Planning for Energy, or SLOPE tool, can be used by state energy agencies to visualize and plan equitable clean energy transitions. So today's primary speaker will be Megan Day from NREL. Megan is a senior energy planner at NREL, where she develops and applies tools, models, and expertise to support state, local, and tribal planning for equitable energy transitions. She led the development of the State and Local Planning for Energy platform and the Scenario Planner, and leads the Sustainable Communities Catalyzer and LA100 Equity Strategies analysis teams. Megan is a certified urban and regional planner with a background in large-scale solar deployment and climate action planning. And Megan will be joined today by Darren Zigich, who is the Engineering Technology Program Manager for the Energy Conservation and Management Department within EMNRD. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan and Darren and let them get on with our awesome webinar.
Thank you so much. All right, and thank you to Darren for joining me here today and co-presenting here on the State and Local Planning for Energy and the Scenario Planner, which we're just launching. So I am going to share my slides here and let me know when you can see them here.
You can see them.
All right. Great.
They're not in full screen mode, but we can see them fine.
Yeah, we'll get there. Sorry, it takes me a couple minutes. But this is a great group to be with. I'm so thrilled to be back with CESA. Some of you may have joined us last year, where we presented some updates to the State and Local Planning for Energy, or SLOPE platform. Today, we will be focusing on visualizing equitable energy transitions with SLOPE and the newly launched Scenario Planner, as well as some additional new energy equity data that is on the SLOPE platform. So let's jump in here. So SLOPE, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a free and easy to access online platform. It is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy and the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So thank you to them and the many different offices within the EERE at DOE for supporting SLOPE and making this possible. SLOPE is meant to enable planners at the state and local levels to make data-driven decisions and to achieve their communities or states' energy goals. So thrilled to be here with a lot of state leaders, and hopefully we can show how this might be a useful tool and platform for you to use in your efforts. So SLOPE now has two main components. The new scenario planner launched at the very beginning of this year, and the scenario planner explores the impacts of different energy transition scenarios on energy consumption, emissions, as well as costs at the county, state, and national scales. So we're very excited to be driving this data down to deliver scenarios at the county level through the scenario planner platform. So we'll talk more about that. And then the data viewer. So the data viewer has been there for several years now and delivers a whole host of different jurisdictionally resolved, either at the county, city, or state levels, depending on the data set, data on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable transportation potential and projections. So we're hoping that that is useful for you. But I want to introduce you to the scenario planner, right? And so sometimes I've just launched into the functionality and all the things that we can deliver and that hopefully help you. And people are a little bit skeptical about where we get all this data. So I want to take a minute to just explain that the scenario planner is built on a whole host of flagship NREL studies and models, as well as U.S. Energy Information Administration data. So we build on US EIA data on consumption for buildings and transportation and the energy sector. And then we feed that through our flagship model and study, the Electrification Future Study, which looks at different scenarios for future electrification levels. And then we run it through and we calibrate it to the county level using, again, multiple flagship models at NREL, and that delivers the SLOPE scenario planner, which has outcomes for 25 unique scenario strategy combinations, again, delivering energy consumption levels through 2050, emissions, CO2 emissions, state level costs, and then some planning metrics, which I'll get to show you in just a minute. So again, these are the whole host of tools that we have integrated and aligned to calibrate data and scenarios down to the county level through 2050. So we're really excited to share this with you and hope that it supports your clean energy planning processes. So I'm going to turn it over to Darren now. And the way this will work is Darren is going to be helping me share what some of his goals are at the state of New Mexico and what his questions are. And then I'll be running through a live demo of the site, the SLOPE Scenario Planner and Data Viewer, to show how we can deliver data to help answer some of Darren's questions. So Darren, I'll leave it to you for now.
All right. Well, thank you, Megan. Yes, here in New Mexico, we, over the last number of years, have embarked on some pretty wide-ranging and aggressive goals for carbon reduction and renewable energy growth in our state. And some is through legislation, through the Energy Transition Act. I'll hit on that's basically our transition to clean electricity, and that's expanding our renewable portfolio standard to 100% by the middle of the century, and with cutoffs moving forward. And then you know, so that's the legislation piece to clean up the electricity grid. And at the same time, our governor, through executive order, has tried to put a target of 45% carbon reduction from the 2005 levels by 2030. That did make it to our legislature this year, but it was one of our shorter sessions. In New Mexico, we have a 30-day budget session, and there's not a whole lot of time for debating those types of large economy-wide endeavors. So it didn't make it through this year, but it is certainly gaining ground and will most likely come up again next year. And I think even in this legislative session, they've tried to increase that to 50% reduction by 2030. And that's economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so what, with that, then, we're asking ourselves, through grid modernization efforts and everything else, how best do we not only clean up the electricity sector, but the end user piece, transportation, buildings, industry, what have you. And so one of our first questions to Megan and her team with the slope scenario planner is, does electrification of buildings and transportation result in energy savings? And what we're comparing it against is just straight old-fashioned energy efficiency, which, we're a state energy office. That's usually our bread and butter is energy efficiency. But does electrification on itself provide us the same benefit moving forward, or additional benefit moving forward? So Megan, I'll let you help us answer that.
Okay. Other questions as we move through from Darren. So I'm pulling up now the slope scenario planner. So you'll see, if those of you who have visited the site before, there's a
Megan, I just
homepage
wanted
where
to chime in. We can't currently see your screen. I don't know if you want to try to reshare it.
Got it. Sorry about that. Glitchy.
There it is.
Glitchy thing. Somehow I tried to put myself on mute and everything went away on my screen. So, okay. You see it now?
Yep.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you, guys. Okay. So some of you may have been here before. So there's a home page which there's a little video, a tutorial about how to use slope. The data viewer is what's been there all along, and then the scenario planner is the new and improved new feature for slope. So today we're going to be focused on the scenario planner. And so per Darren's question, right, where this is basically the showdown, electrification versus efficiency, who's going to win in New Mexico? So let's take a look, right? These are really important questions. Now, the scenarios mean that we always obviously have to focus, make assumptions in how we model the data and how things change over time. Anybody who's projecting the future is obviously going to be wrong. Nobody can know the future, but we've made some best case sort of modeling scenario assumptions, and so we'll see how this plays out. So welcome to the scenario planner, right? We've got a control panel over here on the side, and then you've got your selection for either a county or a state. So I've got New Mexico selected here. And then you've got a lot of different toggles that you can play with and understand, how they impact your different future scenarios at the state or county level. So here we've got emissions here, we've got energy consumption as the metric that we're exploring first. And then we have electricity supply scenarios. That's going to stay sort of reference case. And then we're going to just stick to reference case for this first scenario here. Level of building energy efficiency, I'm going to stick to reference for now. Level of electrification, reference for now, we'll compare it. And then demand side flexibility. This is basically the level of responsiveness, right? Are you managing charging times for your EVs? Are you using demand side interactions with some of the grid interactive building technologies, et cetera? Are you managing that demand so that you can better match when renewable energy, for example, is generating at the most, at the peak? So this is for New Mexico, the reference case, right? We have projected out business as usual, many different sectors here. This is consumption, MMBTU is the metric. We can change that to emissions or costs. And blue here is transportation, non-electricity. This is gas and diesel, right? On-road vehicle fuel consumption. And then we have residential sector, electricity, non-electricity, commercial, electricity, non-electricity, and industrial in purple. So this is natural gas and electricity for industrial sector. And you can see as far as consumption in the reference case that transportation in New Mexico is the big kahuna here as far as where is energy being consumed in the state of New Mexico. So let's turn on a different scenario and explore how this changes. So I'm going to click comparison view here, and we've got a second scenario. Put in New Mexico and the state. And now I've turned on the toggle for widespread electrification down here, level of electrification. You can do reference, medium, or high. So we're looking at widespread electrification. Now, just in terms of energy efficiency or energy consumption, right, MMBTU, we can see that without major efficiency interventions in the business as usual case, the answer is yes. Widespread electrification of both transportation and building end uses has major reductions in energy consumption by 2050, certainly in New Mexico. So what we see here is by 2030, right, that's when many of their goals are set, right? So I'm moving these metrics here to 2030 for both scenarios. By 2030, energy consumption overall has been reduced in the widespread electrification scenario 6% compared to this reference business as usual case. And by 2050, it's actually reduced 28% compared to reference case. Most of this, as you can see, is in the transportation sector. And that is because electric motors are that much more efficient. So we can see the dark blue is again the fuels, and the light blue is transportation electricity. And so yes, electricity increases as energy consumption for transportation increases from electricity, but still the overall efficiency is increased such that it does not offset the decrease in fuel consumption. So that's primarily on the transportation side that you see significant energy savings. Let's go now to energy efficiency. So let's see how that compares. We're going to change this level of electrification back to reference, and then change the level of building energy efficiency. Now, some of you might want to follow along. If you just Google DOE SLOPE, it'll come up, SLOPE, State and Local Planning for Energy. I'm behind the firewall at NREL right now because this level of building energy efficiency is going to be launched live to the public in like a week or two. But right now it's just on staging, so you won't find this on the public site quite yet, but it will be live very soon. So I'm going to switch here to a high level of building energy efficiency and see how that compares to the reference case. So obviously there's a building efficiency, so the transportation sector is not impacted. And you can see that the buildings sector has a slight reduction, and that actually makes is 4% overall reduction in energy consumption by 2030 in this efficiency case versus scenario reference case. And by 2050, it is 8% overall energy consumption decrease in this high efficiency case. So in this case, electrification wins as far as the highest energy consumption reduction scenario, efficiency versus electrification. But let's move on to Darren's number 2 question, and we'll see how this plays out in his next focus area. Gotta find the mute button. Hopefully it doesn't blow everything up like it did to me. Okay. Well, I'll cover for you, Darren.
Darren, it says you're unmuted now if you want to.
I'm still seeing Darren is muted. Darren, are you able to click on the red button on your webinar console? Not working. Here's what we're going to do, Darren. If you could go into the audio section of your webinar console and click on phone call and then click right back into computer audio, it might reset it.
All right, well, Darren's working on that. I do have the question number 2, so I'll keep moving forward here while he works on that. So Darren was asking, as far as buildings, how does greenhouse gas emissions compare, again, in this electrification versus efficiency scenario? I think we can hear you, Darren.
I think I'm back, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so my follow-up question then is, does, and this is strictly for buildings, does building efficiency or building electrification result in greater greenhouse gas emission reductions? So one was energy. Now if we're just looking at greenhouse gas targets, what is the better option or the equivalent term?
All right, thank you, Darren. We're going to change the metrics now from consumption, MMBTUs, to emissions for both of these scenarios. Now, New Mexico has a kind of a funky different emissions projection here. We've got a steep drop off. The scenario planner is calibrated to whatever the legislation was as far as planned emissions reductions policy that was enacted, or renewable portfolio standard that was enacted as of, I believe, May of 2021. There's also some coal plant closures planned, so I think that is part of this steep drop off that is in the future for New Mexico. However, here we have reference case versus, so that's, we have a steep drop off happening regardless in a business as usual case, and the best available energy efficiency in buildings. So what I'm going to do is actually turn off transportation so we can focus on building, right? And just note that as you scroll over the different sectors, it will highlight them for you. And you can scroll over them here and see the actual data represented for each individual year. But I'm going to go down to what we have is planning metrics. So at the state level, we have some really useful, I hope, planning metrics that show comparisons across different sectors and different various metrics. So maybe.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just hearing some audio feedback, Darren. I'm not sure if it's on your end, but it might be.
Thanks. Okay. So what this shows is that you go down here to planning metrics. We have the residential, commercial, and industrial, as well as transportation sectors, and then the total for, now we're looking at CO2 emissions, million metric tons. So what we find is that the energy efficiency scenario has an 8% lower emissions in the residential sector than the reference case, and the commercial sector has a 5% lower emissions. However, the industrial sector has a 5% higher emission. Let's see, then building electrification. So now we're going to switch this reference to, we're going to do electrification versus efficiency. It's on. So I'm changing this reference case to high efficiency, sorry, high electrification, right? So now we've got the head-to-head matchup, widespread electrification versus best available energy efficiency in buildings for the state of New Mexico. We're looking at the year 2030. We've got lower emissions in 2030 in the residential and commercial sectors, and slightly higher in the industrial sectors. I think most of these building energy efficiency measures were focused on residential and commercial, and that's probably why. And obviously, electrification wins in the transportation sector, because we're not doing anything on the transportation sector. So it turns out that by overall, so that means that overall by 2030, widespread electrification has a 2% greater emissions reductions by 2030 and 13% if you look at the transportation sector again. You put those guys back in, overall you have a 13% greater reduction in the widespread electrification than in the building efficiency scenario by 2050. So early on, efficiency wins. Long term, as people shift over to, it's mostly car electrification, vehicle electrification, we've got a greater greenhouse gas reduction in the widespread electrification scenario. So that is question number 2 on electrification versus efficiency, the matchup. But I do want to touch on costs here right before we go to question number 3. So we're going to look at these metrics in terms of costs, right? So what we find in these planning metrics is that efficiency wins in terms of cost by 2030, right? Efficiency has a 12% lower cost. This is the net change in energy system costs. So it's 12% lower costs by 2030 on the efficiency side. So efficiency is winning at first. However, by 2050, if we move this year to 2050, what we can see is we've got what I believe is nearly $1 billion less nearly $1 billion more in net savings by 2050 is what I calculated before. So something's a little different on how I'm measuring it right now. But so I just want to point out these cost metrics, as well as share of space heating provided by electricity. What's your share of battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles by the date you set, as well as share of electricity provided by renewable energy, reduction in carbon emissions, and then the net change in system cost from the reference scenario, right? So here we have electrification is more expensive overall, but it does save in the long run. So, so let's go to your number 3 question, Darren.
All right, well, I'm glad you brought up costs, because our legislature this year just granted us a new program, and we're really excited about this one because it's a low-income energy efficiency grant program. They call it the SEED grant, and we're going to be working with local communities and some of our 23 tribes here in New Mexico to reach out, and find low-income individuals and people that need some help on paying these electric bills or gas bills or what have you, if they have electricity in the first place. So we're going to, with that program, we would like to know that we're putting that grant money to good use. And so my question, Megan, is how can SLOPE and the scenario planner help us prioritize these communities in need, find the communities, the people in need, and what energy efficiency measures provide the the best results, best bang for the buck, I guess.
Great. Well, thank you, Darren, for teeing that up. We are really excited to launch 3 new data layers. They're under energy and environmental justice in the slope data viewer here. So I'll go through them and how they might apply to your targeting for your new grant program for low-income communities and households. The first of these is the Center for Disease Control's Social Vulnerability Index. So what CDC does with the Social Vulnerability Index is they take down at a county level. So here you can actually do census tracts or county. So you can target very specifically, right, down to the census tract level. It'll take a minute to load here. This is live, so you can use this right now on Slope. And I'm not going to wait for it. We'll switch back to county, if it'll let me do that. There we go, county and New Mexico. So the first one is the Social Vulnerability Index, right? And the CDC has developed these groups of different kinds of indicators. And you can see they're grouped by housing type and transportation, minority status and language, socioeconomic, and household composition and disabilities. So there's multiple metrics within each of these indices. And so you can look at across your state at either the county level or the census tract level and pick one of these counties. Ooh, sorry. Having fun with Slope and the Zoom function. And see how they compare, right? So Darren might use this as far as where to target outreach efforts to those communities that have higher ratings as far as different index measurements. So first, the social, the minority status and language is apparently high. Oh, we're in El Paso County, sorry. That's not in New Mexico, but now we're in Otero County, right? So the overall percentile ranking, which is a combination of these 4 metrics or indices, is 91.4. So that's very high. It's in the 5th highest, the highest quintile. And so the darker blue here are the counties with higher ratings of social vulnerability based on a combination, but then you can break these down. So if you want to look at housing type, this is like multifamily, mobile homes, and the like, or socioeconomic, lower income, and then household composition. This might be elderly residents, youth, and residents with disabilities, for example. So here's how you might look at across the county or the state and see which counties have higher social vulnerability. Again, darker blue is the highest quintile, 75 rating or higher. And you can also look at the census tract level to really dial in. So that's one data layer. I'm going to look at the second data layer, which is actually a combination of 2 different data sets. This is a combination in a dual choropleth or multivariate map approach of housing energy burden and transportation energy burden. So housing energy burden is basically what percentage of household income is spent on an annual basis on utility bills, right? So if we look up, we're still in Otero County here. That's the housing energy burden. And as it gets higher, it turns more pink. But we're also mapping it combined with a transportation energy burden. And so this is basically the amount that households are spending on average on transportation costs. So that would primarily be fuels as well as, you know, vehicles and insurance and the like. So what we've done is we've combined these 2. So New Mexico has a lot of rural areas, which can sometimes have very high, right, transportation energy burdens. You have to drive a very long distance. You might be lower income in some of these counties. to reach services, schools, etc. So where those counties have very high combined housing and transportation burdens, you'll see dark blue. So it looks like there aren't any dark blue, but we've got some darker purple, which means they're tending to higher on the housing energy burden. And we've got some dark turquoise here, which means they're higher on the transportation energy burden side. So depending on what kind of interventions, if some of those efficiency interventions might be looking at, supporting household electric vehicle charging, you might want to look more on the transportation burden side to target that. Or if it's really looking at taking the efficiency side that's within the building for energy consumption, you might want to focus on housing burden. So here this breaks it down. So for Otero County, we're kind of right in the middle, but let's look at, for example, Guadalupe County. That has a very high housing energy burden, 9.12%. Anything over 6% is basically considered energy burdened. And this is an average across the county. So you can look at it at the census tract level and then sort of more refined targeting for your program implementation. Right, so that is the housing, energy, and transportation burden dual Choropleth map that's now on Slope that I hope will help you. You can dig into more of this housing energy burden on the low income energy affordability data or LEAD tool. There's a link here in the data description. But we have provided this combined approach so that you can explore more types of energy burdened households and data therein. All right, well, let's go to the final one here. We have low and moderate income single family home bill savings potential. So this is if you implement an upgrade package for low and moderate income households based on the built environment and the types of housing and income in counties. What kinds of bill savings could low and moderate income households achieve in the state of New Mexico? So obviously a very important one for Darren to be using for his grant program targeting. We can see that down south here, you have higher potential, 51% average energy bill savings in low and moderate income households or higher in this darkest green. Looks like you've got some 45 to 51% here in New Mexico, in Hidalgo County, Otero, and Eddy counties. Now we can see that, okay, we've selected Guadalupe here. In Guadalupe County, the greatest energy savings will come from propane savings as far as dollars per year, right? Followed by electricity and then natural gas. So bottled gas, propane is pretty expensive, and there's a lot of that going on in rural areas in New Mexico. So a lot of bill savings in this county for propane, which is actually fairly unique. If you go down here to Hidalgo County, it's much higher on electricity savings. So here's a way to target the kinds of interventions that you might be promoting across your state based on where you could achieve the greatest energy dollar savings for low and moderate income households. So hopefully this can be helpful for you as this maps out across your state where you might want to target and how you might want to target the types of energy that you're saving for households. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the res stock data here. And this is data that we have at the state level. And what we've done is we've taken supercomputing modeling of 350,000 different types of households, single family households. And we've modeled, depending on the different household, climate zone, built environment in each state, what are the most cost-effective energy savings measures for single family homes in each state. taking a little while, sorry, to load here. But if we can see in New Mexico here, there we go. We're looking at electricity savings potential for New Mexico. So New Mexico has kind of a middling energy savings potential here for electricity savings. You're going to achieve the greatest in New Mexico for single family homes by upgrading electric furnaces to variable speed heat pumps at wear out. And this is in terms of gigawatt hours saved. You can also go to the Redstock site and look at dollars saved on a household basis, etc. So that's followed by LED lighting. Oftentimes LED lighting is the highest. So this is interesting that you might not have a whole lot of electric furnaces in New Mexico, but as far as upgrades, statewide, you will achieve the greatest electricity savings by, again, we're seeing that efficiency with heat pumps as really reducing energy consumption, switching from electric furnaces to variable speed heat pumps, but only when they wear out. These are only measures that are cost effective as far as positive net present value. Okay, so let's take a look at fuel savings in New Mexico. And to save fuel, so this is again bottled gas, propane, natural gas, and the like, drill and fill wall insulation would be the greatest across the state residential energy efficiency measure that is cost effective on a net present value. Followed by smart thermostats, attic insulation, duct sealing, etc. Replacing propane furnaces with variable speed heat pumps again. Those show up as well. So that's some ways that you can target how you can achieve greatest energy savings across the state in single family homes. And I'm going to take a quick look, since we have a couple more minutes, at some new data as well that we have on SLOPE, and this is commercial electricity and natural gas savings, right? So again, brand new from our Comstock model. And this for the state of New Mexico, as far as electricity savings, New Mexico is in the top quintile as far as your energy savings potential. So commercial building electricity savings potential in New Mexico in aggregate through cost-effective efficiency measures is 36%. That's really high, right? Across the state, commercial building interventions targeting LED light bulbs. That's a pretty easy switch out, right? For interior lighting. That's the highest potential savings as far as percentage across the state. And then adding advanced hybrid rooftop units, I have to look up that acronym, is the second one here as far as electricity savings, and then upgrading outdoor lights, window film, roof insulation, etc. So that's a lot of potential for commercial buildings in New Mexico. Let's take a look at natural gas savings, which is lower. You have a combined aggregate savings potential in New Mexico of 17%. So not quite in the top echelon there. And that's primarily from adding heat recovery to the HVAC systems. Is the greatest potential there in New Mexico. So excited to share some of those new features on SLOPE and the scenario planner with you. Thank you, Darren, for helping us understand how we can explain these new features and how they're relevant to you. Do you have any follow-up before we go to questions and answers?
No, that's all wonderful data, Megan. That's great. That commercial savings potential, it really reflects in how successful our ESCO programs have been. Energy savings performance contracting has been in this state. On a per capita basis, we were #1 a few years back, and it shows that people are keying into that, especially at the local government level. So that's good to see.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, thanks, Darren, and thanks, Abbe. So let's move on to some questions and answers and explore how maybe the SLOPE and scenario planner can be helpful for your state.
All right, well, we got a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and get through as many as I can, and feel free to continue to put questions into the question box as we start discussing some answers. So to start off with the scenario planner tool, we had a few questions there. The first is how those scenario selections, so things like high electrification versus medium electrification, are defined. And if those definitions can actually be changed depending on if your state had legislation that already defined high electrification as, you know, X percentage or whatever.
Good question. I wish we could, you know, customize every little knob and toggle here, but we did have to make some broad assumptions, again, based on what the legislation in that particular state was, and integrated resource plannings for various utilities were in May of 2021, I believe it was. So it's based on that. It's updated every year, the scenarios and the standard scenarios is what's feeding into this through our regional energy system, the REEDS deployment system tool. So what we can see here is not, you know, we don't have the ability to sort of really customize to whatever your particular legislation that you're considering is. That was a little bit beyond our scenario planning capability. However, you can see here that there are multiple different electricity supply scenarios that we didn't get into, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to touch on those. We have the reference case, as well as a 95% grid decarbonization by 2035 and 95% by 2050. So those you can toggle on if they reflect more closely what you're considering or enacting as far as legislation. You can also toggle on and off again, level of electrification. You have high goals there. Coming soon, I'm looking at the current, not behind the firewall. This is level of energy efficiency, and then demand side flexibility, reference or enhanced. So those are what we can deliver for now. And hopefully they reflect some of your goals so that you can understand how they might change over time.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a helpful answer. I think you kind of got into this a little bit, but the scenarios can't really be altered to also fit kind of different renewable targets, such as, you know, X percentage decarbonization by 2035 beyond what is in the electricity supply scenario, correct?
Yeah. But that's new. So in past years, we haven't been able to model a grid decarbonization scenario. So we're very excited to deliver these two different scenarios this year on SLOPE and the standard scenarios tool.
Yeah, no, that's still, I mean, this is still very exciting.
You asked what on earth are we assuming, and what do these scenarios mean? What's behind them? So in each scenario, there is a description, right? So you can read the description about the scenario if you just click on the top or scroll down to the bottom here, right? So as far as we're combining in this example, 95% grid decarbonization by 2050 with widespread electrification, right? And we're looking at the metric of CO2 emissions in New Mexico. So you can read all the summary here and then dig deeper. You can always dig deeper in SLOPE, documentation of the methodology. So there's a write-up that goes into great detail on what are the assumptions and what, you know, how closely they might mirror your own goals or legislation that's come up since May 2021 or not. So always can dig deeper, but this is a good description of the assumptions that we made for these scenarios.
Thanks, Megan. I think that's really helpful. Is there any way to use the scenario planner tool to kind of capture like synergistic impacts? So I mean, we looked at electrification versus efficiency, but combining those two or some combination of the two like that?
Absolutely. Some you can combine. Some we were unable to combine them because we're trying to parse them out so that you could see them uniquely. So you can combine, for example, grid decarbonization with electrification. The efficiency one stands a bit alone. It's hard to, we had to sort of assume building envelope upgrades as well as equipment upgrades that didn't include high electrification, right? So you might be a more efficient natural gas furnace, or you might have, you know, greater HVAC efficiency of different form. So the efficiency does not necessarily play well with others. You kind of have to toggle that on and off a bit uniquely. But the demand side flexibility you can also layer on and off with these other. So that's kind of the fun, if you're a nerd like me, in playing with these as looking at, like, can you turn them all on, and you know, how far do you get, and then what's the difference if you turn one on and off. So most of them, yes, you can layer on together, and that's a pretty new, I think, innovation with the scenario planner, is the interaction, not only between scenarios, but also between sectors, right? So we're integrating the transportation sector with the building sector so that we can know, obviously, there's more vehicle charging going on at the residential and commercial building level in a high transportation electrification scenario. So we're looking at those interactions between sectors here too.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's great how powerful this new iteration really is. So great to hear that. Moving towards sort of the equity side of things, is there any way, or are there plans to maybe do this in a future iteration of the scenario planner, to view energy bill savings or reduction of energy burden in the scenario planner?
Okay, energy bill savings or energy reduction in the scenario planner. What we've got in the scenario planner currently is overall change in system costs. So we don't say this is exactly how much the total energy system costs. We say what the change will be, right, from a reference case scenario. That doesn't translate down to bill savings for individual households. It's the overall system cost. We are looking at next iteration, next version of SLOPE in the scenario planner that could model household bill changes. It's really tough. We don't know how the utilities are going to break out those costs, right, across the residential, commercial, industrial sectors, and how they might translate that into bill costs. But we're looking at going in that direction in the future. However, I do want to let you know that on the data viewer, the ResStock data, if you go to the ResStock site, it will actually give you some household bill savings potential, right? So we've represented it here as far as aggregate statewide energy savings potential, but you can translate that at the ResStock site, and they have state fact sheets into household bill savings potential.
Awesome, thank you for that. And yeah, I'm definitely a hard thing to capture, but glad to know that you all are looking at it for future iterations. There's also some questions as to how equity could be factored in as a metric in the scenario planner. So for example, would electrification versus efficiency impact heavily burdened populations more? I know it's kind of a amorphous question to address with the data that you all have, but would be curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so what we are also looking at is doing criteria pollutant impacts from various scenarios. Right now we just have carbon, greenhouse gas emissions, right? We don't have NOx, SOx, particulate matter, etc. So we're exploring a future version where we can also deliver those air quality impacts. So there's an equity nexus there as far as, you know, overburdened and underserved communities tend to have higher asthma incidents, etc. So we're looking at that as a potential future approach. You can also look at costs, overall system costs, and see sort of where you would achieve energy savings. So energy efficiency, as we saw, was the sort of most cost-effective near-term approach. With electrification, you do have a lot of capital equipment costs, right, as you move forward in time. And just trying to pull up the cost metric here. But over time, oops, you save more with this efficiency cost, scenario or electrification scenario. So it's a trade-off that you could consider for equity metrics. Beyond that, yeah, we're looking at maybe integrating job impacts from various scenarios in the future. And we're really excited to be delivering the 3 new data layers on equity for now.
Yeah, and because you mentioned job impacts, and this might also be a question that Darren could weigh in on. Are there any thoughts on using SLOPE for planning out workforce demands, if you're going to be scaling up your electrification or anything like that?
Darren, do you have any ideas there?
I don't have a, I guess I can't say I've thought of that, but yeah, I mean, that certainly would be a nice tool moving forward, as we start implementing some of these changes, to where that workforce is needed. Because I mean, certainly that's a big topic, especially in an oil and gas state like ours. That transition comes at a cost of existing jobs, so we need to replace those.
Yeah, and again, we're looking at modeling out some job impacts of these different scenarios, as well as integrating some recent research that was done at the state level in terms of energy transition job changes. So hopefully we can deliver that data soon on SLOPE.
Great. Well, in our last few minutes, I want to pivot to the equity data sets and layers. So one quick question, is it possible to download all that data from the layers into Excel or any other data files?
Yes, thank you for asking. I failed to tell you that every one of these data sets is downloadable. So here's the little download icon. Sorry, I got the save icon. This is the download icon. So it'll download the data for whatever jurisdiction you selected here, be it a county, state, or national. And it'll download it as a CSV file. So you can change your scenario, download that file, combine them. That's what I did to pull out some of these metrics that I mentioned in the presentation. So yes, awesome. Everything's downloadable, transparent, accessible.
Yeah, that's great. So Megan, you did cover kind of the single family data sets, but there was a question of if there's any multifamily data sets available, and if you'd just quickly go through any of those.
I want to point you towards the commercial buildings data set here on the data viewer. So here we're looking at, it'll pull it up. Multifamily is the orange one here in, this is a very tiny county we're looking at here, Zabaca County. Let's find a county where they actually have some multifamily housing. Okay, this is Albuquerque's county, Bernalillo County. And this I find really helpful at the county level. You can also do city level for commercial buildings. So you got city, county, or state, and you can look at the breakdown of building count or building area by type. And multifamily is included in those commercial buildings, right? So you can kind of look at how those break down in terms of size. So we broke it down here in size threshold, how many square feet are above 5,000 square feet buildings, above 50,000 square feet buildings. So if you had an energy performance standard for commercial buildings that cities and counties can use this data. But obviously, that gives you some data on multifamily. These tend to be units, buildings with units, 20 units or more. But it does include some breakdown of, fourplex or 10 units or more as well. So that's hopefully a helpful data set on the multifamily side.
All right, awesome. Well, I know we're at time and I feel like we could keep talking about this for hours. There's just like so much information to mine out of the site, but thank you, Megan and Darren, so much for being with us today. And Megan, can folks email you if they have other questions?
Absolutely, megan.day@nrel.gov.
Awesome, and we will be sharing around the slides and the recording of this webinar as well, and that information will be there. So yeah, thank you all so much once again for attending, and please join us again for some upcoming webinars if you're interested in this topic. We're covering things like resilience hubs and mobile solar and storage for emergency management, which is again looking at particularly solar and storage for resiliency and helping underserved communities. And yeah, I won't go through all of the webinars we have coming up because there's a lot of them, but thank you all again so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Darren and Abby. Great to be with you.